Hi there, and welcome to SUP Module 5, Weather Forecasting Apps. The weather plays a massive role in our paddling, and in the UK, the weather is so changeable. Relying on a weather summary from the TV or radio news to plan our paddling is going to make it tough, as they're just a general guide. We need to know the detailed hour-by-hour forecasts for the duration of our trip to ensure we're going to stay safe and enjoy our paddling. Luckily for us, there are many weather apps and websites available which supply this information in a straightforward manner which is easily to understand. We're going to start with a summary of what we're looking for in a forecast and then move on to review the apps I have found that give a good, reliable forecast. I'm based in the northeast of the UK, so it's best to check your chosen app forecast against the reality for where you live. I have the apps saved to one of my home screens on my smartphone, and all the apps have the same favourite location saved. So I can very quickly cross-check one app forecast against another, as it's best to check a couple of forecasts just to check if they agree. If they differ significantly, then I will find another so I get a close match. Okay, let's get started and review the contents of Module 5. First off, we'll look at a summary of what to look for. We'll move on to orientating the wind direction to the map. Then we'll look at forecasting apps and web pages. We'll then look at a spot of homework, which we can all do. And finally, there's a further reading section. Okay, a summary of what we're looking for. So first off, we're looking for an hourly forecast for locations that we're considering. Once we have the forecast, I'll then look at a general overview of the day, looking at the sun, wind, temperatures, surf height, etc. And then I'm going to ask myself some kind of general questions. Is it a pleasant forecast? Does the wind speed or direction change at any point in the day? The next thing I'll probably look at is a couple of critical things. So one will be the wind speed and direction. So I'm kind of thinking, yeah, somewhere around 12 mile an hour maximum's probably a good limit to play with. But if I'm going on the coast and it's an offshore wind, then I'm probably looking at 10 miles an hour maximum. Again, if I'm going on the coast, obviously the kind of surf and swell height is pretty important. So I'll be looking for a figure about 1 to 2 feet max. Once we've looked at the forecast and we've just kind of studied it for a few minutes, then we can probably just start to move on and start thinking about, okay, what to wear, what locations will suit the forecast best. Maybe we thought we were going to go to Seaton Carew, but we've got a 15 mile an hour offshore wind forecast, so we're gonna maybe swap and go on the River Wear at Durham. And the last point is, once we've got an idea of the forecast and maybe an idea of where we're going, and we just need to just double check what skills and experience are needed for the location and forecast. So can I take my 14-year-old nephew, this is his first time paddleboarding, can I take him to Seaton Carew with 2-foot waves and a 10 mile an hour offshore wind? Probably not. Once we have the forecast, okay, great, we have the forecast, but we now need to relate the forecast to the location that we plan to paddle in. This is going to help with a couple of things. Number one, if we're paddling on the coast, it's going to help us spot an offshore wind, and it's also going to help us in deciding which way we're going to paddle, and that's actually going to help us with the influence of the wind. So in the previous models we talked about doing the outward leg into the wind, having a break, and then the return leg we turn round, and then we'd have a tailwind. So that would actually help us if we're actually feeling a bit tired. We can do the above by looking at a map or a satellite view using Google Earth on our smartphone, and then once we've got a map or our satellite image, we can then draw on the direction of the wind. The next slide just goes through a couple of examples. Okay, this slide looks at orientating the wind direction to our map, and we'll just run through a couple of examples. The first example is paddling at Seaton Carew. So this is a coastal venue. So we'll just look at the different wind directions. So first off, if we take an offshore high risk wind, so we're probably thinking about limiting the wind speed to somewhere around 10 miles an hour. So offshore winds for this location, so they would be southerly, southwesterly, or westerly. Cross-shore winds, so these are probably medium risk, but we still need to make sure that we're not going to get blown against rocks or a breakwater. So cross-shore winds for this location, so they will be southeasterly or northwest. And finally, if we look at our favorite wind direction, onshore, low risk. So for this location, if the wind was coming from the east, the northeast, or the north, and yeah, happy days. The next example that we've got is paddling on the River Tees. So we've got a little map of the river. We've got the river flow marked on, and we've got a southerly wind. So if we're planning to launch from Preston Park and we're kind of thinking, well, do I go upstream or do I go downstream first? Well, it's probably, we talked about this before, it's probably better to do the outward leg paddling into the wind. So we would head upstream towards Yarm, have our lunch or have a break, and then turn round, and then we would do the return leg, and we would have the wind at our back blowing us back to Preston Park. The other thing we probably just need to think about is the river flow as well. So on our outward leg, we'd actually be paddling against the flow as well. So when we actually turn round, it's a bit like a double whammy. We've got the wind and the river flow helping us back to Preston Park. Okay, next up, we're just going to run through the weather apps that I found to be fairly easy to use and give good forecasts. The other thing that I've done is I've used my same favorite location for all these apps. So when we run through the apps, each of the forecasts is for Seaton Carew, which is a coastal location on the northeast of the UK. So the first up is the BBC weather app. And then we'll just run through the points. So you get a good local forecast. It's actually for the next 14 days, but as we know in the UK, we seem to struggle to kind of forecast the next 2 or 3 days. So just need to take that with a pinch of salt. You get weather warnings included, so that could be snow, ice, wind. It's easy to set your favourites up, so your different locations, so Seaton Carew, Preston Park, Durham, etc. It's really easy to do that. You can set a maximum of 10 favourites up. The daily forecast is split into hourly segments, so that's really great. So you can run through and see if the wind direction changes or it starts to rain, heavy rains forecast after 1 o'clock, etc. Yeah, we also get the wind chill factor, so we talked about that previously. So it's actually saying the temperature's forecasted to be 6 degrees, but with the 10-mile-an-hour wind, it's actually going to feel like 3 degrees. So that's pretty useful. Wind speed, we only get the average wind speed and direction. We don't get any information about the gusts. So previously when we've talked about wind speed limits, so we've kind of said, maybe offshore wind 10 mile an hour is probably a good number to have in the back of our mind. It's the average wind speed that we're talking about. And finally, yeah, it's really easy to use. It's got a very clear interface. It's got the little graphics on. You also get the sunrise and sunset times. So yeah, it's a great little app. Recommended. Okay, next up we've got the Met Office weather app. So we get a detailed forecast for the next 7 days. What is especially good is we actually get a rain radar forecast as well, which is really handy. It's easy to set the favorites up. We get weather warnings like we did with the BBC app. The wind chill factors also covered. We just hit the little bit that says feels like, and that gives us the wind chill factors. A bit more detailed on the wind, so we get the direction. We get the direction, we get the average wind speed, and we also get the gusts. So that's a little bit more info. And again, we get the sunrise and sunset temperatures, and we also get a UV forecast and a air pollution forecast again. So it's a great little app, and quite a lot of information here. Okay, next up is the Windy app. So with the Windy app, we get 6-day forecast, and it's especially good for the wind. Again, we get the average and the gust speeds, and quite a lot of the measurements are color coded. So there we are. Sorry, let me get my little pointer. So we've got the wind direction, got the gust speed and the average, and the wind speed's actually color coded. So low winds are white. It's getting stronger, it goes to blue. Getting stronger goes to green. Getting even stronger, it goes to orange. So it's kind of color coded, which I quite like. We also get the surf and swell heights and the directions. And again, it's pretty easy to set your favorites up. Okay, we've spoken about the wind speed being color coded. One thing I would say is it is quite detailed and it does take a bit to understand, but it's actually well worth it. One of the things that I find really handy is you can kind of drop a pin down, and you get the wind direction given, and then you also get the primary and secondary swell heights and periods given. So I think that's pretty good. Okay, next up is Magic Seaweed, which probably takes the prize for the best name. So we get a good local and general forecast for the next 7 days. It's really good for wind. We get the average and gust speed. Again, a lot of the measurements are color coded, which helps. We get the surf and swell height and the direction, and again it's easy to set your favorites up. Depending where you are, sometimes it will give a general location. So for this one it's saying Seaton to Blythe, but specific locations, especially surf orientated venues. So Saltburn actually gets its own location. So wind, yeah, we've got the average wind speed, gusts, and then we've got the direction, and again it's color coded: green low, orange getting a bit stronger, strong winds in red. So that's pretty good. Again, it's a bit like the Windy app. It does take a bit to kind of get your head around it, but it is worth it. And if you're into surfing, you also get a kind of star rating for the surf. So again, yeah, it's pretty good app. Okay, this is the Met Office beach forecast and tide times. So this is the last forecasting tool that we'll take a look at. So we get a detailed local forecast for the next 7 days. Again, it's great for wind. We get the direction, the average, and the gust speeds. Let me just get my little pointer. So yeah, so we've got the average wind speed, we've got the gusts, and we've also got the wind direction as well. And yeah, we get the swell height and direction and period. We also get the tide times as well. So we've got high, and low again. So that's great. And then yeah, we've also got the wind chill factors. So it feels like 4 degrees. So it was forecast to be 7, but because we've got an average wind of 10, it's going to feel like 4. It's easy to set the favorites up. And yeah, one thing that I think is really great. It actually gives you some information that's really easy to spot on whether the wind is cross shore, onshore, or offshore, because you get a little icon. So the green's the shore, blue's the sea, and then you get an arrow. So that's saying we've got an offshore wind, and it's changing through the day. So it's coming cross shore. Oh, look, it's coming onshore. It's definitely onshore. So I think that's a really great feature that the other apps don't do. So the other apps, you've got to look at the wind direction and then orientate it to the map, whereas this tool actually gives you that information. So I quite like this app. Okay, just the last thing. Yeah, it's not actually an app. It's actually a web page, but you can still save it to the home page of your phone with a favorite. So again, it's really easy to use. Which app for where? Okay, so on this slide, we're just going to look at the so we went through our 5 apps, and we're just going to say which of these apps or are any of these apps better for different locations. So if I'm paddling inland, so a lake or a river, I get my kind of general forecast and my info from BBC Weather and the Met Office, and then I use the Windy app to just kind of cross reference the wind, because it tends to have more of a detailed wind forecast. If I'm going to my favorite place, Seaton Crew on the coast, then I use the Windy app to check the wind, and then Magic Seaweed and the Met Office beach forecast and tide times. One thing to be careful of with the apps is when you set them up, they come with default units of measurement. So is the wind speed in meters per second, kilometers an hour, miles per hour. So we just need to be careful here, because when we're looking at the app, the units of measurement aren't given. So let's say we could have the wind speed set to 10 meters a second. So we think 10, well, that's okay. That's our maximum offshore wind speed. That's okay. That's safe. But 10 meters per second is actually 22 miles an hour. So we just need to be careful. And the units can be set up in the settings section of each app. So that gives you a choice to set your wind speed to miles an hour, your temperatures to degrees Celsius, and your kind of surf and swell height to feet. Just one last thing on this slide is some of the apps, so Magic Seaweed and the Windy, you can get paid versions, and I think you get a more detailed breakdown. So instead of a 3-hourly forecast, you get an hourly forecast. I found that I haven't actually paid for those apps, and I found that the free versions are fine. Okay, we're almost there. We've just got a spot of homework for everyone to do. So the first bit is I'm suggesting that you download the weather apps onto your phone and set up the places, set up your favorites for the places that you normally paddle at. And then secondly, review some coastal locations that you paddle at and run through what the wind directions would be for an offshore wind, a cross-shore wind, and an onshore wind. And finally, we could review some rivers or lakes that you paddle on and run through what is the best wind direction for your favourite trips. Further reading. Just got a few useful links here. Because the Windy app and the Magic Seaweed app are slightly more complicated than the other apps, I'll include the guides on how to use those forecasting apps. I've also found 2 articles by SUP magazine. The first article looks about which apps are available for forecasting and how to understand them. And the second article talks about making the most of your SUP sessions. So this is quite a good article because it looks at different forecasts and how they impact wave height, which areas are sheltered, which areas aren't sheltered, and how to kind of plan your route or different routes depending on what the weather conditions are. And it's a really good article, and I would recommend reading that one. Congratulations, you've completed SUP Safe Module 5. Well done.